talk to people who know English only, because Hindi at least has this construction, and I think several of the South Asian languages. But when you talk to a wider audience, English is the language that everyone knows, and it's possible to make more headway because more people are engaged with it, right? So that's just lucky. So we start with something we all know. Basically, a question denotes the set of possible answers. We build up the question meaning this way. Everybody is more or less comfortable with this idea now? Yeah? That in the end, what we have is, for a question is lambda p, there exists a person x, and p equals x left for the question who left. And then depending on who are the individuals in the domain, we'll get some set of propositions like Sue left, Amy left. And then from this set, we'll apply the answerhood operator and choose whichever one happens to be true. Yeah? Okay. So, and then we also assume felicity conditions, that the answer to the question must not be in the common ground, right? So C star should not be a subset of answer Q. So answer Q is a proposition. Let's say Sue left. That should not already be part of the common ground, right? And the speaker is interested in finding out answers. This is what we've been talking about. Okay. So again, these are things we've looked at. These are some of the special properties that make WH questions interesting. Scope taking in WH, that there's a lot of variation in cross-linguistic variation in how scope is manifested. And then this is the one that we start going into the topic of these slides, which is even within a language. So French and Bhasa Malay, they're supposed to be others. They manifest single WH as well as WH in C2. So, and I don't know, something that we will be doing today, we will be looking at languages to see to what extent we have the variation. And then this is German, which has all three versions of ways of questioning out of a finite complement. So you can either do extraction. Everybody familiar with this word, extraction? So it's WH movement across a clause, right? From a subordinate to a matrix clause. That's extraction. Scope marking has a what phrase in the beginning, in the first clause, and there's a WH in the second clause or in the subordinate clause. That WH could be anything. And then the third is something that we will not discuss much in this class because I don't know that much about it, but it's called the WH copy construction, and that's something where the same word is repeated. So if you want to ask where should we go, you would say something that's the equivalent of where do you think we should go? You would say, where should we go? So you repeat the same. There are some constraints. They don't like full noun phrases, so you don't say which book do you think, which book should we read. It's usually monomorphemic, and there are a few other constraints, but that's just to show you that there seems to be a lot of variation. Okay, so this is something that I've been emphasizing, that generally our evidence for scope in questions is indirect. It's based on answers. So native speaker judgments about question-answer paradigms form the basis for theories of scope taking. This is a more delicate diagnostic than truth-value judgments. Truth-value judgments, you present a scenario, you present facts in whichever way, pictures, statement, whatever, and you give a sentence and you say, is the sentence true or false? But this depends on what we decide about question-answer paradigms, right? So this is something I think we looked at yesterday. Have you seen my book? Well, I saw Mary reading it last night. That sounds pretty coherent, even more natural than saying, have you seen my book? Yes, I have. That seems somewhat uncooperative, right? But you don't want a theory. Sorry. How far did I go? Yeah, you don't want a theory built on three, because it could be anything, right? It's that. So you do want a theory built on 4A, 4B, even though in some sense that doesn't seem natural, or it doesn't seem the best answer in the context. But it is a direct answer which then can be elaborated on in different ways. So these are things which we have been looking at. To get to, and then this is something that we discussed also yesterday about the, I think it was Rinku's question, right? The no one. And we already, well, I said that as far as this class is concerned, we will assume that there's an existential presupposition, and that existential presupposition can be challenged at cross-speaker dialogues. Now, if you think about what we've been talking about, common ground, you can think of it this way. The person who asks the question assumes it is part of common ground knowledge that someone came. That's the presupposition. And says who came or who left, whatever, right? Someone left. But of course, we can be mistaken about what we think is in the common ground. And in answering with no one, you're implicitly saying, adjust your common ground. We didn't, you were wrong about your presupposition that someone left is, so you're implicitly denying the existential presupposition. Okay, so that's the line I'm taking, and that's the line that follows Katunen and Peters, who showed that the same person cannot express ambivalence about whether someone came or ignorance about whether someone came and follow up with a WH question. And so it's a there are, one should do more, one can say more about the nature of presuppositions. They're supposed to be soft triggers and hard triggers. One can talk about those things, but the idea is that the speaker can signal that I'm assuming this, but I could be wrong. It's just my belief. So it's possible that I could be wrong by suspending it. Okay, so this is one way to think. This is a very, very important diagnostic that we use in analyzing questions. It's also a very dangerous diagnostic, so I want to be very clear about why this is a problem. Okay, so I call it this specification scope correlation. You have a question? Yes?
Could you give us one example where the speaker actually indicates that he might be wrong at his existential question?
Okay, so that's 6B, 6B. So you can say who, if anyone, it's usually as a parenthetical, and that, does that work? Yeah. I don't know if all of them translate into Hindi. See this, it's funny, a lot of these things, when I work, I haven't done the Hindi in my head, like I don't know why. I'm bilingual when it comes to, I either do it, I'm not bilingual, I should say. I don't do both in Hindi and English, but that's the idea. There may be some other way of doing it in Hindi.
More of a forced translation, I would say.
Wait, what were you?
So 5A and 6B,
Mm-hmm.
does the denotation change or the same?
It would have to, right? Like I haven't seen the denotation, so that would be sort of the default, right? Who was at the party presupposes there exists someone who was at the party. This would be something conditional. It would be something to the effect. It would be something that would encode something like, did anyone come to the party, and if so, who? Now I haven't seen actual, so it depends on how you integrate the parenthetical into the discourse. Praveen, you were
just saying that it's not a very natural way for me to say a thing like in this kind of
in English or in Hindi. Yeah, like just now when I was talking about it, I thought, I wonder if how this will work in Hindi. There may be some other way, but that's what you pardon.
It's like for the 5 ways, like कौन आया party में.
Mm-hmm.
No, 6B.
Yeah,
6B.
I am saying that.
Uh-huh.
कोई आया क्या party में. It's like then you can.
कोई आया क्या party में?
अगर कोई आया तो कौन?
Mm.
Yeah, but that's a literal translation.
Yeah, but it's not. it doesn't sound as natural as the English one, right? That's the point. So, I mean, if people who are looking for topics and stuff, these are the kinds of things that one can think about and see if there's something, of course, it's possible, there's something else. If we think about the context where we would, how would we say it? If we wanted to signal, maybe you would say koi aaya, kaun. Maybe you would just have two statements. I don't know. Maybe this, but then in terms of developing this topic, one should also then look whether parentheticals behave differently in general. Like, you might have to go back to Horn and see how he used the diagnostic. So I'm just putting it out there, but not everything translates easily. But I would say that I would want the Hindi basic question, kaun aaya, to also have the existential presupposition. But whether it does or not is something that we should discuss. मुझे नहीं मालूम कोई आया कि कोई आया था लेकिन कौन आया था. Sounds as bad, right? So that
the other wala construction seems more okay.
Even though a little wordy. Yeah, maybe you use, I don't know, workshop. Okay. But this is precisely the kind of questions we should be asking. So how I would frame this question is that in English, in Hindi too, there's an existential presupposition if we use the 6A test. It also allows the no one answer like 5A and B. But how do we suspend the presup? How can the speaker signal that they're not sure? Maybe, people might differ on whether agar koi aaya to kaun, right? So that's what seems a bit different from the English one.
What if we leave it at koi aaya particle?
Koi aaya, then you see the question is ki nahi koi nahi aaya. That's a good answer.
Did anyone? Yeah, it presupposes the negation that nobody has come from.
Okay, so you're saying koi,
Did anyone come rather than who came?
and then expect an elaboration, right? So you're saying just ask, did anyone come? And leave, yeah. So I don't know, something for you all to do. Okay. So this one is, okay, so this is a diagnostic that is extremely important and that we have been using because there's no other way to, this is what we have. However, it is extremely powerful and I want to argue against this in various ways, in a certain sense, I should say. So variation, so this says an answer to a question specifies values for all and only the WH expressions which are in matrix spec. This is something that is used by syntacticians, semanticists fairly robustly. I would even go so far as to say, if you just ask someone who's not really thinking deeply about specific questions, they'll say, yeah, that sounds like a good diagnostic. But we will see, so scope marking is one case where I want to argue against this. So the variation in question formation plus the view that questions must denote the set of possible answers leads to a correlation between specification of values in the answer and the scope of WH in the question. So the idea is however deeply embedded a WH is, there's a correlation between this, sorry, I should put it here. If in the answer you give values for this WH, then specification scope in correlation says then that WH is in matrix clause. It has scope at the matrix level, okay? So, and this is certainly helpful in the case of monoclausal questions. In the case of embedded questions across long distance questions, it's a little more tricky. But even in the case of monoclausal questions, look at this one. Which book did these kids read? Okay. A very normal way to answer this question is to say, Mary read Ivanhoe and John read Emma, right? So I'm giving specification of values for what? For which book? Ivanhoe, Emma, and these kids. These kids is not a WH. Normally should not be in spec, So I'm specifying values of something. So the explanation for this is that basically you're answering the question. The real answer should be, these kids read Ivanhoe and Emma. And then cooperatively you're giving the distributive answer. Okay? So I'm just putting it out there. That's not what we're going to discuss today. This is also there in my book, so anyone who wants to follow up can read that. But this is just a kind of cautionary note that it shouldn't be a knee-jerk reaction. Specification, therefore WH scope. Okay? And now I'm going to look at, so it's when WH dependencies stretch across clauses that this specification scope correlation becomes a powerful tool that needs careful handling. So I'm not saying it should be discarded, okay? I'm not saying that. I'm just saying use it with care. Okay? All right. So let's look at scope marking. This is first documented for German as a strategy for questioning out of finite clauses. Just as a, just to take the pulse, in the non-English languages that we all speak, how many of us can get a question out of a finite clause? The equivalent of who does Carl think Maria spoke to? Something like that. How many of, say in Hindi or Marathi or any of the languages that you put in your list, how would you ask this question? Who does Carl think Maria spoke to? So did you do extraction? No. How many people did extraction? Yes, so I think also some dialects of Hindi has bole. So it depends on the complementizer, it depends on a number of things. But I think that I heard no for a lot of people, right? You said that for Marathi or for Hindi, yeah. So just putting it up there. So, but German can do this, at least some dialects. Okay. So this is the version that we're thinking about. So, of course, here you would, so there's, the alternative is this one, 7a. What thinks Carl? Carl क्या सोचता है? Who did Maria speak to? Maria किससे बात कर रही थी? This is a structure we use in Hindi, right?
When you say sochta hai, are you not translating it? Meaning, for me, but the more natural would be lagta hai.
Carl को क्या लगता है? वो किससे बात कर रही थी? Yes, that's fine. Yeah, that's cool with me. What would you use in Bangla? You'd use bole as, and then did you use the scope marking or not? Like, did you have two WHs or just one? One. So this is the thing that Renuka was saying for Marathi, right? So, but Hindi doesn't have a bole type of complementizer. So it could, so even within a language, it might depend on that. So lots of issues here, but the question here is, okay, what is the status of these things? So you have a fixed, what is a scope marking construction? It has a fixed WH expression, roughly equivalent to what? So the same word that you use for asking, what are you thinking, what are you eating? Typically, that's the one that is used in the first in the matrix. And then the embedded can have any WH you want. It can have more than one also. Okay. The predicate must be a minus WH selecting predicate. So this is where again the plus minus WH plays a role. So if you had a word like ask, Ravi kya पूछता है कौन आएगा? That should be bad because that's kind of like hard to figure out what it is. But Ravi क्या सोचता है या Ravi को क्या लगता है? That is okay. The complement, but so the selecting word should be minus WH selecting, but the clause itself must have a WH or must be a yes-no question. In German, the yes-no doesn't work for different reasons. Okay, it can have any WH that is good otherwise. It can be any combination of WHs that is good. So who saw what, who went where, all that is fine. Yes-no question in Hindi is okay, apparently not in German, and there may be separate reasons for that. So the answer to the question specifies values for all the embedded WH expressions, not the matrix what or how. So this is now, you think, put yourself in the mind of the German linguist, Van Riemsdyk, who is using specification scope correlation. He is coming from a language like English and German extraction. And what is the natural and how would you, when you approach this, what is the most plausible analysis? Voila, this is what he looks at. He says, okay, there's a vas, I don't see anything to do with vas in the answer. What I see is with who in the answer. I'm giving the value with Hans. Therefore, this must be like extraction. Both of them seem to give the same answer, right? And so that is his analysis of scope marking. What steps do we go through? In the case of extraction, it's pretty simple, right? We take a WH, we move it through comp. Everybody good with that, right? There are no islands involved. It's possible to extract. And by analogy, based on this specification scope correlation, then we want to end up with the same LF. So what we want is with whom to be all the way at the top, was somehow to disappear, and then we have a trace at the bottom, right? But these are the steps that are involved. And you can decide for yourself whether you think that's good or bad. Yes. Yes, yes. I would be surprised if you all got it just like that. I would wonder what I spent 20 years doing. Okay. All right. So let's step one. Oops. Extraction, right? Everybody gets extraction. So this is with who did Maria speak? So, with who thinks? Carl, right? Carl thinks Maria spoke, right? And it goes from here, maybe stops at this C, right? Everyone okay with this for extraction? Now when it comes to the scope marking, we are assuming we want this at the end because that's the answer we are getting. We are getting answers for with who. But in order to get there, what do we have to do? Originally there was a was here, right? Or what? If I translate it, let's translate it. What? So this what has to be deleted, right? That's the first step. What gets deleted at LF? Expletives, things that have no meaning. So, yeah, that's the deletion of what. And then, mind you, this is German, so with whom was not here. With whom was already in spec, right? So it had already done this movement. And now we have to start, normally we start movement from argument position to scope position. So it was already in a potential scope position, but you can say, I'm not disagreeing, you can say, well, look, this is a word that takes minus WH, so this is not in the right place, this is how we will fix it. Here's an expletive, we move it at LF covertly, and now we get what we want, yeah? Okay. So that's the account, which was reasonable enough. There are two problems with it. If was is an expletive, that should be replaced at LF. You should also, I think, expect, suppose I had was, Maria spoke to who? This should also be possible, right? At LF I delete this and I move this, right? I mean, one could argue this is possible, but in fact this is ungrammatical. So there's, scope marking has an anti-locality requirement. You have on this view, you have an expletive, was, and it should pair up or be replaced by something not in its own clause, but in a clause lower down. Okay? Everybody good with this? Yes.
वो उसकी पोजीशन क्या है, C0 और C spec of C?
इसकी
Was
a spec of CP. I don't know if they have arguments to show whether it is in C0 or in spec of CP. I don't, because it's a phrase, it can be a phrase, then I would say that it is spec of CP, right? Because C0 may, you can only have, it's a functional head, so I don't know. I've only seen it in spec of CP, but I just assumed, I just accepted that. Any other questions? Okay, so this I find a potential problem, because you would have to say, so think about Japanese Q mark. So this would be like, you could say this is like a Q mark or something like that. That is okay. Japanese car is okay with something in its own clause. This would have to have an anti-locality clause. There's another problem which is a little bit, again, it depends. Okay. Yeah. So if there were two WHs here.
Could you project the board instead of this?
Could I do what?
Could we project the board instead
How?
of this? Because we have the slide.
Oh, okay. So how do we?
Then cannot read.
Oh, okay. So how do I project this? What do? Okay. We can do the handout. Yeah, since I guess we have more need for this. So if we had two WHs, so what if the sentence was thinks Carl with who has spoken with who? Both, we would give answers for both WHs that are embedded. So replacement would have to be replaced with both the embedded WH.
Could you explain the anti-locality constraint again here?
Okay, now that you can see it, okay, all right. So what are the facts? The facts are that you can have a was and you can have a WH in the embedded clause, and you get the effect of being replaced. The anti-locality clauses, what about a sentence like was, Maria spoke mit wem? Maria spoke to who? On this view, it would have been okay to say, okay, was is an expletive. At LF, this who replaces was. And we get the question, who did Maria speak to? In principle. But you can't do that with was. You have to say mit wem Maria gesprochen, whatever. You do fix your word order and all that properly, but basically you have to do this movement at S structure. You can't have a was at S structure, that's replaced. So this is a bit of a problem, I think, for this account. You know that I'm going to argue against this account, right? The way I set it up? Okay. Yeah. Oh, no point doing this now. Okay, let me get to this. Let me see where I am. So I was on slide 11, right? So now I'm moving to slide 12. Yes, so this is the alternative that I'm presenting. So don't look there anymore till I start drawing again. Now we're on handouts. Okay, so slide 12, the alternative to score two. So the first one I called direct dependency. Why did I call it direct dependency? Because in the end, after you've done all your replacement and everything, you're creating a chain from matrix spec all the way down directly to the argument position, right? So now I'm saying, I'm presenting the alternative view, which is which I call the indirect dependency view. And the indirect dependency view, I'll again play out the examples and how what it means. So this, of course, was based on German, the direct dependency view, and I was looking at it from the perspective of Hindi, whereas we just discussed, when you have a finite clause, you can't really extract very easily. There are some ways of doing it, but normally finite clauses are islands, right? So Hindi scope marking has the matrix W. So how do we ask this question? So if you say Anu janti hai ki Uma kahan gayi, this is a declarative, right? In Hindi, I don't think. I mean, I wasn't the only one. There's several people at that time who were working on this, and this was a fact that never was challenged by anyone. So Hindi W agency 2 does not escape this finite clause. What do we see from 11b? Anu kya sochti hai ki Uma kahan gayi? This is how we would ask this question, right? And then the answer would be Uma Dilli gayi or whatever, right? So this is exactly what we see in German. The difference being that now this expletive that they said was in step of matrix clause is actually sitting exactly where the direct object sits, because it shows in situ. And the other thing that I noticed was that you have a corresponding non-WH version, right? So Anu ye sochti hai ki Uma wahan gayi, or whatever you want to say. So it seemed to take up that same argument slot where direct objects go. And so from that, it was a short step to saying, really what we have are, there is no direct dependency between matrix what and embedded where. So if you look at slide 13, so the claim was that the LF of this structure involved two separate clauses. I'll refine it a little bit later, but basically you have two questions, okay? The first question has a dependency between what and think. So वो क्या सोचती है? And that's a question you can ask independently. तुम क्या सोच रहे हो? What do you think? So no matter whose theory you want, you have to have a way of asking questions about thoughts, right? Okay, so that's the first piece of it. It's simply a question about what you think. And on that view, so using what we have been, it would be lambda p, there exists something, p equals you think, लगता है, whatever, but it's propositional, right? This is the sort of frame we would have. It would be a set of propositions of what type? If I asked you, what do you think? You would say, I think. Just make up something. The earth is flat, yes, that's a good one. I think the earth is flat. Another one, I think.
That dragons can drink fire.
Oh, she's now earth is flat and okay. But it's all of the same form, right? I think that the earth is flat, that dragons eat fire, that it is raining, etc., etc., right? So what are these things? Are they individuals or what are they? Sentences that denote propositions, right? So you need a variable that is of propositional type. And yesterday, remember I said it's just convention, we use propositions, small letters, so Q, let's say Q. So there exists a Q. I'm going to fill this later. P equals you think, believe, whatever Q, right? That makes sense? So you're going to think of all kinds of propositions. The earth is flat, it is raining, this class will end at 2, anything you want, those will be the alternatives, right? Everyone okay with this?
What if we have something like, I think about you?
Ah, we will not deal with that. Why? Because we will have CPs, right? So you're absolutely right that a lot of these verbs are cross-categorial, right? So I believe the story. I believe his story. I believe that the earth is flat. So drawing on this, so that is a possibility that when you just ask, okay, let me ask you, if I say, what are you thinking? You can say, I'm thinking about you, right? Yeah. But so that's a possibility that we would have to probably build into the syntax, right? Because think about you would be a prepositional phrase, whereas if we had think that the earth is flat, it would be a CP phrase. So perhaps the syntax would tell us that we're dealing with this versus that. But it's the same what that we would use for both, right? In fact, that's the problem. What is very forgiving. It allows a lot of things. Tomorrow or day after we'll see it's not so forgiving, but for today. So, but you're absolutely right. We draw our it's syntax and semantics, and there's a connection between the two that does constrain the space. But also there's another thing that constrains space. So I've said there exists some Q. You can think of all the possible propositions and you can put it in this frame. You think Q. But quite often when we ask questions or we talk about things, we contextually narrow it down to some particular set, right? So when I say everyone is here, I mean everyone who's supposed to be here is here, right? So it's not just people in general, but people in this class. So natural language quantification tends to be restricted in some way. So imagine again we were back when class ends, we're all hungry, and we say, where should we go? What do you think? Where should we go? Right? I'm not interested in your thoughts about the earth. I'm interested in your thoughts about something specific, right? Places to eat or something like that, right? So let's put in a variable here, some kind of topic or something. This is going to be important, so we'll come back to this in a bit. But that's the first question. What do you think? It's just a question about possible propositions that you have thoughts about, or you are thinking about, or you believe, depending on your word. Now let's look at the second question. Where has Uma gone? That's just a straightforward question that we've been looking at earlier, right? So the second question is simply lambda p. I'll make it p prime just to keep things separate. There exists an x, place x, and p prime equals Uma went to x, right? And that's all there is. So we have two questions. But how do we combine the two? That's the indirect dependency part. We have to make them dependent. So everyone good with these two pieces? So what I do here simply, there's this co-indexation between this piece and the second question. How does that work? Basically, who was asking what lambda yesterday? See, this is the beauty of lambda conversion, lambda calculus, I should say. You take this piece and you say, oh, here's a free variable that I can abstract over. Before we get that there, let me ask you, this is a proposition, right? its type is that of a proposition. So what should this be? Again, by analogy, if I say book X or place X, this is an individual place, this is a set of places, right? And you're checking, is Paris a place, is Delhi a place, is Mumbai a place? So you have a set of places and you check if this is good, then you go on with the rest. Similarly here, if this is a proposition, then we need a set of propositions. Voila. So we have this here. And if we abstract over this, which is a set of propositions, can this go in for this? Right? So we have a question sitting on the side. We have a variable, free variable. So lambda conversion works beautifully, right? And so the effect of this question then is the following. After we do lambda conversion, I should have it done here. Yeah. Okay, so on slide 13, 12b, what are the meanings? The meaning is lambda p, there exists a q. I put it as q is in, it's the same thing. Q is a member of, yes, Srikar, question? So this is a little bit complicated looking. It's not really complicated. Just stop me and we can, parse it if need be. So the meaning of the first question is that the set of propositions P such that for some Q, Anu thinks Q or believes Q, whatever. But where is that Q coming from? The Q must be a member of the meaning of the second CP. What is the meaning of the second CP? Is the set of propositions such that for some place X, Uma went to X, right? So that's all there is. That is what co-indexation means. Okay? Everybody good? If there are doubts, if you want me to go over it again, Tika, you okay? Pardon? The co-indexation is between, just like between ye and that he's, Anu ye janti hai ki Uma wahan gayi. We usually co-index the two, right? Because they're both taking up the same slot. What exact syntax you want, I will leave open for now, because there are two possibilities for the syntax. One could be that it's a DP with ye as its determiner and a CP complement. That's one option, ye or kya, right? The other option is that, so whether you have ye or you have kya, you have an actual DP that has this as a complement that then gets extraposed. This has been proposed by someone, as we'll see. The other option is that this is like what and this, which may not have a deep, it's an intransitive determiner. But semantically, you still have some implicit restriction. So whether this is, the CP is in the syntax here and gets extraposed, or whether it starts out there, in some sense, I'll leave it, I'm somewhat neutral, in the sense that sequential scope marking, I would say you don't want it to be a unit. We can look into it. Let me go through the actual, how this system works, and then we can come back to this question. But the co-indexation is between ye or kya, or in German was, and this in some way. Okay? All right. So let's see. So it's basically the same idea as when we say what, there's an implicit what thing, right? What object. Here it's saying what proposition. That's the basic idea. And then this process is fully recursive. तुम क्या सोचते हो, वो क्या कहेगी, कहाँ जा, हमें कहाँ जाना चाहिए? You just keep rolling it up. Okay? I have it in Appendix A. If we want to go over that, we can look at it later. Let's get the basic story out. Okay. So on 14, I have given a recap. So there are two approaches to scope marking. One is the direct dependency approach, where the syntax does all the work, right? You take the syntax, that you see on surface and you change it. You erase was and you do expletive replacement with a single WH word, not the whole clause. The indirect dependency approach is syntax light. It kind of maintains the syntax that you see, but then it places some burden on the semantics to get the binding or the connection between the two. On this view, there's convergence with extraction, not equivalence. They both happen to end up with the same meaning. Questions, anyone? Take it? Yes.
Could you please elaborate?
On what? On?
The convergence.
Okay. So the idea, okay, so I guess, so how do you answer this question? Once you've done this, your question is really asking about, so this is in the final stages, right? We have this, and we simply say that this Q is this, right? So you're saying, I have a set of propositions that will range over various Qs that such that you think that Q, or whoever is the Anu thinks that Q, but that Q must belong in this set of propositions. So when I answer, so the propositions that we'll end up with will be the same. I think that Earth is flat will not go in here, right? Because it doesn't belong in there. What will go in here will be things like, I think Uma went to Delhi, right? That will go in there. I think Uma went to Pune, etc., etc. They'll all be of this form. And of course, when the answer with operator applies, we'll see which one is true. If that's what I think that she went to Delhi, then that will be the answer it will pick out. So in effect, it converges with the extraction case, but not because they have the same LF. So that's why it's convergence, not equivalence. Does that make sense? So you get the same effect without actually making the two syntactically the same. And this will pay off in a little bit. So, ready for the next step? Kind of? Okay. All of these things, you have to hear it a few times before. Sometimes I try to think, when I read at two levels. At one level, I try to get the general idea. And then if I'm interested, then I go back and then I work sweat the details. You can't really make too much headway without sweating the details. But sometimes it's better to get the full idea before you sweat the details, because why should you spend your time if it's not interesting, if the results don't convince you? Okay. So now, there's a little bit of history. When I first presented this idea, it wasn't like I hadn't separated out the syntax and semantics enough. And in fact, at that time, I also had not recognized sequential scope marking. So I thought Hindi, I thought German, and I just had them a certain way. But in fact, sequential scope marking now tells us something. So, this is English, right? What do you think? Where should we go? What do you think? Who should work in which group? Any question you can think of, you can put there. Now, the syntacticians among you, tell me, would you want to apply the extraction logic here? These are two separate questions, right? They have main clause syntax. The second clause here is not, see, in Hindi it's hard to tell whether you have subordination or not, because Hindi key is a little funny. So you can, usko kya lagta hai ki, you can say ki Uma kahan gayi, right? So subordinated, it makes sense to think subordinated. Another thing, हर लड़के को क्या लगता है कि उसको क्या करना चाहिए, या उसे कहाँ जाना चाहिए. You can get binding, but there are issues that people say, Hindi subordinate clauses are not subordinated. But now we have English. We have clearer intuitions about this. And German, which has two kinds, so this was 1996, where Marga Rice had these examples for German and me for English, that really helps us tease apart syntax from semantics. So in the syntax, you can see that this is main clause syntax. What do you think? Where has he gone? And here the he cannot be co-referential. So let me show you the next example. How do I have it here? Okay, it'll come later, doesn't matter. So here are some trees that I'll present to you on page 16. You can have two questions that are not scope marking questions. So suppose you have to I have to fill out some information, and I say, what's your name? Where do you live? These are two questions that I think are simply, I put in ask as the speech act. So the speaker asks the addressee, and the addressee provides the name. That's one question. And the speaker asks, where do you live? And I can go on. So this is just a conjunction of speech acts of questioning.
So how we differentiate it based on whether it's a single speech act under which there are.
Right. So that's the second one. And this one is, so this is a scope marking. It's a single speech act, but it's a speech act that involves a covert restriction. So it has two properties. One is it's a speech act that questions propositions, and therefore its restriction has to be a set of propositions, which is a question, right? That's what we've been discussing. Question is a set of propositions. So this would be a plausible syntax for it. So you have conjunction at the CP level, both under one speech act operator. Yeah, and in this case, I think you have to say it's an implicit restriction, because I don't know of a good syntactic theory that would create a main clause. You know, if you're going to have it in this position, then it should have subordinate syntax. So this is what I think is important. Here is what we on slide 18. This would be what we would get for subordinated scope marking. Okay, this is a case where you start out with this structure, and so you still have the single speech act ask. You have a CP, and that CP has a DP in pre-verbal position, and it is kya followed by CP, and then the syntax of Hindi and German says you got to extrapose. And there is so this is Herberger's was the first one to give this analysis, and at that time it was only subordinated. I think this is the distinction we need. We need it in the syntax. So because Hindi, so this is the same for Hindi and German. The only difference is that in German it's a double fronting language, so you pronounce vas at the left periphery or at the head of the tail. In Hindi, it's an in situ language, so you pronounce the tail of the chain, right? Okay, yeah, 15A and B show the difference between the two structures. And again, this is something that I had actually misunderstood in my 94 paper because I was not tuned into this difference. But this data is correct. If you have the equivalent of, so the English should be easy for us to understand. What does everyone think? Where should he go? Is it about each person's whereabouts, or about, which college should that kid go to? It's the diptych he, right? And that's exactly the reading you get when you have sequential in all these languages. But in the subordinated case, which you know because someone asked, how do you know it's subordinated? Because you don't get V2. So in German, main clause is like English, you have inversion or something like inversion in the sense that the second position has to be the verb. And that's what you see in 15A, where followed by will. So that's main clause syntax. In 15B, you see where followed by he followed by the verb. So in B, you can get binding. In A, you cannot get binding. Okay, so that's the syntactic difference. And there is, given the time, I'm not going to go through the process of how you would get the actual reading to come out. But again, if you have time and you have interest, it's there, and I've given the references where they come from. What I'm going to present now is...
What prevents binding in 15?
Oh, okay, that I can say without going too much. What prevents binding in 15? So this is what we would have, right? This is the structure we have. The only difference being that here, this is not exactly right. I'm just going to do it as a way of demonstrating, okay? It's not exactly how it should be, but for all x, person x, and think you that x should go, no, sorry, person x, and think xq, yes, xq, right? This is the main clause. So, and somewhere in q, so q is here, right? Q is where should, instead of Uma, now we have he, which is x sub I, let's say. So I'm doing it very schematically, but it's actually worked out in the appendix. If we have time, I can go back to it. The point is the following. If you want this to be bound by person, that's what you want, right? So for every person x, there's some place that x wants to go to, or whatever should go to. What would it take? Right now it's not in the syntactic C command domain, right? So this is a free variable. When you bind this somehow or the other through lambda calculation, lambda conversion, you want to put it in, and you want to bind the free variable by an operator. Now, those of you who have done lambda calculus know this, and it's probably been demonstrated to you. The others have to accept it on faith. You can, lambda conversion is okay as long as the types match, except for one restriction, and that is a free variable should not get bound in the process of lambda conversion. It's a way of preserving meaning, you know, like accidentally you can work, or if you think that something that is free will get bound, you go to alphabetic variants, but you want to preserve that meaning, that it refers to that individual, not to whatever binder you have. If you wanted to get coreference, you would have to do illegal lambda conversion. You would have to take something that is free in this domain and bind it in the process of lambda conversion. So that's what blocks this. So it's nothing special to scope marking. It simply says, look, you're using lambda conversion, not going to work. In this case, in the subordinated case, you actually don't do lambda conversion because you